Welcome back to Vantage. We have seen some diversification out of the US market, people looking for growth markets. We've got one really exciting market, which is booming. Let's go take a look. Welcome back to Vantage. Since December, we have been looking at a possible diversification out of the US as valuations look challenged and the growth outlook looks a little bit more uncertain. The diversification is looking for markets that's growing, and so I'm delighted to have Craig Martin of Dynam Capital here with us today. Craig, perhaps for the viewers who don't know the fund and yourself, maybe just explain yourself, your role, and what Vietnam Holdings is.
Certainly. Well, Neil, as you said, I'm chairman of Dynam Capital. We're the fund manager for Vietnam Holding. Vietnam Holding is listed on the main board of the London Stock Exchange and invests exclusively in the exciting growth market of Vietnam.
Okay, I started by talking about growth. Vietnam's recorded some extraordinary sort of GDP growth, 7% in 2024, projections of 8% for 2025. You know, you're on the ground. What are the factors driving this?
Well, growth is certainly good, isn't it, in this world?
Yeah.
And I think for Vietnam, if you look back, it's grown at 6.5% GDP on average every year for the last 30 years. Mm-hmm. And why is that? The main driver has been the foreign direct investment. So these are multinationals looking to manufacture in Vietnam for export. And last year, that foreign direct investment was about $25 billion.
Wow.
And most of that's going into productive manufacturing. And that's a big growth driver for the economy. The other growth driver is the domestic investment, public expenditure in infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And that has a leveraged impact on growth. Last year, that expenditure was also about $25 or $26 billion. This year, I think it's targeted to be $30 billion. And that's a multiplier effect to economic growth. Mm-hmm. And then thirdly, there's tourism. I don't know if you've been, but there's a lot to see in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And so tourism levels are back ahead of where they were, pre-pandemic. But finally, I mean, Vietnam doesn't sit on its laurels. It's enjoyed the 6.5% growth. And as you mentioned, targeting 8%. Well, that's a punchy, ambitious target. Notwithstanding that, after that, they're trying to get to 10%. Mm-hmm. So maybe there's a little bit of wriggle room there if, there's a hit to trade, and we can talk about that. But I think also that will mean the government's really serious about making the economy more efficient. So that's further reforms of the state-owned enterprises. And it's also about cutting down perhaps some bureaucracy. Seems to be the flavor of the month everywhere, isn't it? Reduce the civil service, find more efficiency. And Vietnam's looking at that as well. So that's another driver of the long-term growth in Vietnam.
Okay. I think we'd characterize probably the last 3 years as a significant shift geopolitically, and a lot of that sort of coming out of the US and policy shifts as part of the new administration. How is that impacting Vietnam? And I guess the big question is, but everyone is focused on tariffs and what that impact is going to be. What do you see the impact on Vietnam being?
Well, not only is growth good, but trade is good.
Yeah.
And Vietnam has set out its industrial policy for many years about being a key part of the world's supply chain.
Yeah.
It's got 17 free trade agreements. Its exports are about 100% of GDP. And as we're in a fairly volatile period about trade and tariffs, it was similarly volatile the last time Trump came into the White House.
Yeah, okay.
And there was a net benefit to Vietnam. We saw a lot of Chinese and people leaving China plus one coming to
Yeah.
But obviously Vietnam needs to keep a close eye on this now, because during that period, Vietnam's exports to the US really grew very significantly. So I think if Trump was to look at this purely logically and economically, he'd first go after China, then Mexico, and then probably not long after that, Vietnam.
Yeah.
But interestingly, he hasn't gone after Vietnam, at least not yet. And well, why is that? Well, partly it's Vietnam doesn't have a border with the US.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not a source of fentanyl flooding the US. It's not a source of mass illegal migration into the US. And actually, Vietnam has a border, but a border with China.
Yeah.
and China's the adversary of the US. So maybe the US is looking at Vietnam as maybe an ally geopolitically. But Vietnam is very pragmatic. The government has welcomed Trump to invest in Vietnam. Has welcomed Elon Musk to invest in Vietnam. As we speak, there are about 60 US companies visiting Vietnam. And Vietnam hasn't really had a lot of US direct investment. So it's trying to encourage more. It's also trying to balance the books a little bit in terms of the imports and the exports. So I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't see, deals around maybe importing US energy, LNG, from the US, kind of shale gas boom. Also maybe US agricultural stuff to feed Vietnamese people, but also for processing into exports. And maybe if Boeing can get its act together, which remains to be seen, Vietnam will buy lots of Boeing planes. It's got a huge growing sector. So I think it's being very pragmatic around that. If Trump is a deal-driven man, which we're told he is, I'm sure Vietnam is willing to cut a deal.
So I'm going to summarize that as some challenges, some opportunities. Keep a close eye on it.
Keep a close eye on it.
But it could be potentially a beneficiary of trade deals and also the re-engineering of supply chains.
Particularly if this narrative of a friendly shore, which we saw emerge, if that persists, then Vietnam could be reasonably well placed in that.
Okay. So now we've covered the macro side of things. How do investors, once you actually want to then get exposed to it and invest in the equities market, how do investors perceive the Vietnam Stock Exchange? And what is the journey it's taking it? And, is it on track effectively to upgrade to an emerging market, get into the indexes? What's the position on the market?
Well, it's a bit of a paradox. So Vietnam's done really well. Economy's very strong, the envy of many. Stock market's done really well. But for foreign investors, they're not really participating in that growth yet. And if you look at Vietnam and emerging markets of Southeast Asia, actually, over the last few years, there's been a net exodus, a net outflow of money from emerging markets to developed economies, to US stocks, Magnificent Seven and Nvidia and what have you. And also actually emerging markets, have underwhelmed over the last few years, with the exception of Vietnam. Vietnam's outperformed the MSCI emerging markets and the frontier markets. So Vietnam is still a frontier market, and the vigor and the vim and the excitement in the equity market is domestically driven. So about 10 million Vietnamese individual share investors, 10% of the population. Neil, I think that's more than in the UK, both in terms of absolute number and in terms of percentage. So it's not yet really on the international global institutional investor radar. There are some positive signs. So Vietnam's trying to upgrade its stock market infrastructure. I think we spoke about this the last time. It's taken some time. They need a public holiday. They need to turn off the engine, put in the new software in the system and turn it back on. That could happen at the end of this month or the end of next month. And then there are some signs that FTSE Russell, one of the index makers, may look to move Vietnam to the secondary emerging market status. So MSCI is probably a long way off still. Foreign investors aren't that active, but the great beauty is if a foreign investor is interested, they can invest in Vietnam easily through the London Stock Exchange, through buying into Vietnam Holding. So we provide that kind of access point for foreign investors.
And I mean, you've done well. You've kept outperforming the Vietnam All Share. So now let's get into the investment process. What do you attribute the outperformance to? How have you beaten the index?
Well, look, if you look back over 5 years, as you say, we've probably delivered maybe a 20% compound annual growth rate in the NAV, in the net asset value, maybe against the index rise of 12, 13%. So that's 700 basis points of alpha, of outperformance. And that's largely through stock selection and portfolio construction. We run a fairly concentrated portfolio, 22 names in that. We're looking for great businesses, good growth, but at a reasonable valuation. And that's what we've done, fairly simply. And last year we won quite a few awards for our long-term performance. The team, we're Citywire triple rated since the beginning of last year. I should add this year, actually the first few months of this year, those domestic investors I alluded to, they've kind of turned their attention to a few unloved index stocks, which have driven the index up, and the foreigners have been selling. So actually, year to date, we're slightly below the index, but it's only March. We're a long-term investor, and we've got a track record of delivering alpha or outperformance.
Okay. When you look at your sort of portfolio positioning for 2025, and one of the great themes that is sort of emerging over the last sort of 18, 24 months has been AI. I just wonder how you're positioning your portfolio for A, the changing world we're in, and B, the impact of some, what could be profound technology and which, impacts all kinds of businesses. So what is your view of 2025 and how you're positioning?
Well, it's a great question. It's a technological revolution, isn't it? It's like a paradigm shift, and it favors software engineers. Vietnam's got heaps of them. In Vietnam, about 40% of the graduates that graduate in Vietnam come out with a STEM, science, technology, engineering, maths degree. That's twice the global average. And FPT, our number one position, is a leading player, both in technology, which of course today means AI, but also in terms of education.
Okay.
And FPT, alongside the Vietnamese government, has really actually welcomed AI, both kind of figuratively as well as literally. And several of the founding godfathers of AI, people like Andrew Ng, who co-founded Coursera and is a big AI advocate, Yan LeCun, Yoshua Bengio, people like that, they've visited Vietnam. They've been given awards recognizing their contribution to AI. They're helping develop curriculum and helping the government put AI on the map in Vietnam. They see it as a game changer. So FPT would be one portfolio company that's taken this head on. But actually in the banks and in the logistics companies, they're all looking to use AI to become a little bit more efficient. 35% of our portfolio is in banks. As they adopt better technology for credit scoring, for customer acquisition, we expect to see some further efficiencies. So AI is everywhere. Vietnam wants to put itself at the heart of this kind of modern industrialization, which I think today means AI. So very exciting times.
Okay. And look, I love bringing these stories to life by just talking through, a name, etc., the elevator pitch, but which encapsulates your approach to investing. So I don't know if you can pick something from the portfolio. I mean, we can get further into FTP if that is it. But, let's walk through, what is the business, etc. What do you find appealing? How did you find it? And how long you've been invested in it? And what do you expect of it going forwards? Is there a stock like that you can talk to?
Well, if we step back and look at, what are the trends that we like in Vietnam? One is the kind of increased urbanization. Cities are getting bigger. The other is probably the rise of the domestic consumer. So we like consumer stocks and retail stocks. And one actually is linked to FPT. It's a company called FRT, and it's a retail stock. It was set up by FPT, believe it or not, and was selling IT goods and gadgets. They spun it off about 7.5 years ago into a separate IPO. They still own about 47% of it. It's a really well-managed business. They acquired a small pharmacy chain, retail pharmacies, think Boots or Watson, something like that, with about 70 outlets. Today it's got close to 2,000 outlets across the country. Rapid level of growth in sales, 50% per annum. And we see that playing well into the growing disposable income, increased focus of the Vietnamese people on health and well-being. And then this is a well-managed chain of pharmacies. And what we like about it, it's a straightforward business in many ways, but retail is detail. And they've got twice the number of SKUs and products as their closest competitor. They've got a very accommodating, welcoming kind of shop front. And they're on the cusp of a terrific transformation in their profit. Because they've been growing a number of stores, they've been losing money. Their net profit margin last year was negative, about 10% negative. The year before, in 2023. Last year it turned positive, about 1%, maybe 2%. Management think they can get to 3 or 4%. We think they can probably get to 5%. And then when you've got a business that's doing close to $2 billion a year of revenue, that means a terrific growth in the underlying earnings. So if you look at today, it would look expensive. It's on a 40 times PE ratio. But that's because the E has just turned positive.
Yeah. Okay.
And so we think it's a great value opportunity. It's about $1 billion of market cap of a company. So it's in that kind of cusp of kind of small to medium to large on that journey. We think it's a great business with good legs ahead of it. So that's one that we've got a close eye on.
I think that is such a great case study because you've married, you've done the top-down thematics.
Yes.
You've married it up, the retailer's detailed, the bottom-up understanding of a business, and then the understanding of actually the risk reward and the valuation of where this business sits for the size of the business it is and what the trajectory.
Yeah.
So great little
No, it's a
story,
lovely
I think.
company.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So if people want to learn more about Vietnam, what would you recommend them to do? Your website, is it a good source?
Yeah, the website's got a lot of information. So
Yeah.
that's vietnamholding.com.
Okay.
We've got a lot of facts about the fund and interesting articles. We're also quite active on social media because we think the Vietnamese story and the growth is a great story.
Yeah.
And we have a series called Viva Vietnam about different trends that are emerging. So best place to go is the website and find out more information about us there.